I went camping alone in northern Pennsylvania during the summer of 2016. I was 26 at the time, restless and tired of working long shifts in a warehouse. I just wanted quiet, somewhere to sit by a fire, hear nothing but trees and wind, and not think about anything for a while. I'd found a small, unofficial campground deep off Route 19, near a place called Kettle Creek. It wasn't one of those organized campgrounds with bathrooms or other people. It was just a patch of woods near a lake, miles from any cell signal. That was what I wanted, complete isolation. The drive there took longer than I thought. Once I left the main road, the trail narrowed down to gravel and then to a rough dirt path full of dips and rocks. My old Ford Ranger groaned every time I hit a bump, and my GPS stopped working halfway in. The trees were thick and close on both sides, almost blocking out the sunlight. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No birds, no cars, nothing but the constant crunch of my tires on gravel. It felt peaceful, but in that kind of peace where you start to realize how empty a place can really be. I reached a clearing near dusk. It wasn't much, just a flat stretch of dirt beside the lake, surrounded by tall pines. The water looked calm and black under the fading light. I parked the truck, unloaded my gear, and set up my tent about 20 feet from the lake's edge. By the time I got a fire going, the sky had gone deep blue, and the woods behind me had gone completely still. I ate canned beans straight from the tin, then sat with my feet near the fire, just listening. The air smelled like damp wood and pine needles. I stayed like that for a while, watching the flames twist and crackle. Every few minutes, I'd hear a splash in the lake or a branch snapping somewhere behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's the woods, things move. But after a while, it started to feel like those sounds weren't random. They came in little bursts, then nothing, then again closer. The kind of sound that makes you lift your head and stare into the trees, but you can't see anything. When it got close to midnight, I doused the fire down to embers and went into my tent. I left one lantern outside, hanging by the zipper. I lay there for a while, scrolling through old pictures on my phone even though I had no signal. Eventually, I dozed off. I woke up sometime later. It was still dark, probably around 2 or 3 in the morning. I couldn't tell what woke me at first, but then I heard it again. Slow, heavy footsteps moving somewhere near my tent. I froze. The sound was soft, but close enough that I could tell it wasn't an animal moving on 4 legs. It was slow and deliberate, like someone walking carefully through the undergrowth. My first thought was maybe another camper or a hunter passing by, but there were no other cars out there, and I hadn't seen a single sign of life all day. The footsteps stopped near the fire pit. I could hear faint crunches of gravel, then the sound of something brushing against my cooler. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. The thin nylon wall of the tent felt useless between me and whatever was outside. My heartbeat was loud enough that I thought it might give me away. A minute passed, then another. I finally reached slowly for the flashlight beside me. I didn't unzip the tent, just shined the beam through the thin fabric. The shadow outside shifted slightly. I couldn't make out a shape, just a blur of movement. It stood still for several seconds, then turned away. I heard slow steps fading toward the lake. I lay awake until dawn. The moment the first bit of gray light came through the trees, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The air was damp, and a thin mist hung low over the water. My cooler had been moved a few feet from where I left it. The lid was half open. One of the latches had been broken off. A few cans of food were missing. My firewood pile looked disturbed too, like someone had kicked through it. There were footprints in the dirt, bare footprints. Not boots or shoes, just long, flat feet pressed deep into the mud leading down toward the lake. I followed them for a bit, but they disappeared at the edge of the water. I told myself maybe it was some local drunk wandering around. Maybe someone living off the grid nearby. I tried not to think too much about it. I packed up the broken latch, checked my gear, and spent the morning fishing to calm down. The day passed without anything strange. I convinced myself that maybe I'd overreacted. That night, I built a larger fire and moved my tent a little closer to it. I kept my knife beside my sleeping bag and my flashlight within reach. Around 10, I heard distant thunder. A storm was rolling in from the west. Within an hour, rain was coming down hard. I sat under the tarp I'd hung up, watching water drip off the edges, listening to the steady rumble of thunder. The woods smelled sharp and clean, like wet earth. I felt safer with the rain. The noise made me feel less alone. When I finally went to sleep, it must have been close to midnight again. The storm hadn't stopped, but it had softened to a drizzle. I woke up to a sound I'll never forget: the rip of fabric. The side of my tent tore open from the outside, clean down the middle. Cold rain hit my face as I sat up, my heart slamming in my chest. My flashlight beam caught movement. A figure crouched just outside the torn fabric, half in the shadows, half in the light. It wasn't a ghost or some creature. It was a man. His clothes were soaked and filthy, hanging loose off his frame. His skin was pale and covered in mud. He looked like he hadn't bathed or eaten properly in weeks. His eyes were wide open, and even though I couldn't see them clearly, I could tell something was wrong with him. He didn't say a word, just stared at me for a few seconds before bolting back into the trees. I grabbed my knife and stumbled out into the rain, shining my light through the trees. The beam caught glimpses of wet branches, the shimmer of raindrops, and nothing else. No sound but the rain. I didn't chase him. I didn't pack anything. I just sat there by the fire until dawn, shaking. When the sun came up, I saw muddy prints leading around my tent, circling it multiple times. There were handprints, too, smeared on the back of my truck and cooler. The strange thing was, I found some torn-up fabric a few yards away. It looked like part of an old shirt, soaked and shredded, as if someone had been living out there for a long time. I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't bother folding the tent. I stuffed it in the truck bed, threw everything else on top, and drove out. My tires spun in the mud before catching grip. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, and I didn't look in the mirror until I was at least 20 miles away. Later that week, when I was back home, I looked up the area online. I found an old local news post about a man who'd gone missing near Kettle Creek a few years earlier. They never found him. Some hikers claim to have seen signs of someone living in the woods, stealing food and gear from campsites. The last sighting had been near Route 19, close to where I'd been. I never went back there. I still go camping sometimes, but never alone, and never without checking the area first. Every time I hear something in the woods at night, no matter how small, it takes me back to that moment. The tear of my tent, the flash of those pale eyes, the sound of rain hitting the ground between us. People say the woods are peaceful. I used to think that too. But out there, when it's just you and miles of trees, you realize peace can turn into something else entirely. Something that listens, waits, and watches when you least expect it. I still have that tent. The tier is stitched up, but I keep it as it is, just as a reminder. Not of fear, but of the fact that out there, the scariest thing you can find isn't something supernatural. It's just another person, one who's been alone too long. It was late September of 2019 when I decided to go on a solo camping trip in northern Arizona. I had been working long weeks at a construction job in Flagstaff and just wanted some quiet, some place where I wouldn't hear engines or people yelling. I picked an area near the Kaibab National Forest, not too far from the Utah border. I had been there once before with a friend, years back, and remembered the tall pines, the long dirt roads, and how the nights felt heavy with silence. I left early in the morning, stopped in a small town for gas and food, then drove for a few hours on winding roads that turned to gravel and then dirt. My truck rattled the whole way. The deeper I went, the less signs of life I saw. The sky was pale blue and cloudless. By the time I found a clearing big enough to set up my tent, the sun had already started to lower, giving the trees that dim gold tint. The air smelled like pine sap and dry dirt. I parked near a slope where I could see a narrow stream running below. I unpacked, set up my small green tent, and built a fire pit out of rocks. I had packed simple food, canned chili, protein bars, and a few bottles of water. After I ate, I just sat by the fire, listening. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet where every crack of a twig feels louder than it should. When it got darker, I turned off my phone's flashlight and just watched the fire fade. The night sky above was packed with stars, more than I ever saw in the city. I felt small under it, but peaceful. I crawled into my sleeping bag around 11. The tent smelled faintly of smoke from my jacket. The cold seeped in through the floor, and the forest settled into that deep, distant kind of quiet again. At some point during the night, I woke up. I didn't know what time it was, but it was pitch black, and the air inside the tent felt cold enough to sting when I breathed. I thought I'd heard something outside, maybe branches cracking. I lay still and listened. There was movement, not fast but slow, deliberate. Something stepped on dry leaves just a few yards away from my tent. I held my breath, trying to convince myself it was just a deer. There were plenty of them in these parts, but the steps didn't sound like hooves. They sounded uneven, like a person walking barefoot on sticks. There'd be a crunch, then a pause, then another crunch. I reached for the small flashlight beside my sleeping bag, but I didn't turn it on. I just held it tight, waiting. The sound stopped for a while. I thought maybe whatever it was had gone back into the trees. Then I heard it again, closer this time. I could make out breathing, faint but rough, like someone who'd been running. The tent's thin nylon wall moved slightly, just enough that I could tell something was right outside. I could hear it drag its foot or hand across the side of the tent, the sound of skin or fur brushing the fabric. I froze. My mouth went dry. My mind was racing, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe a hiker? But who the hell would hike this far into the woods at night, without a light, without saying anything? I finally built up the nerve to click on the flashlight. The second the light came on, everything outside went completely silent. I didn't even hear crickets, just dead, still air. I waited, shining the beam toward the tent wall. Nothing moved. After maybe a minute, I slowly unzipped the tent flap just enough to look out. The light cut through the darkness in a narrow cone, hitting the edge of the trees. I didn't see anyone or anything, but I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were fresh prints in the dirt, not boot prints or animal tracks. They looked human, but they were wrong. The toes were long, almost too long, and the arch was strange, flat and stretched. They led from the tree line straight to my tent, then back toward the woods. I zipped the tent back up fast. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the flashlight once. I sat there for what felt like hours, listening, waiting. I didn't sleep again that night. I just kept the light on until the sky outside turned gray with dawn. When morning finally came, I stepped out. The air felt different, heavy. The forest looked normal, but the ground around my campsite told another story. The prints were real, clearer in the daylight. I followed them a few feet toward the trees, but they faded out as the ground turned to pine needles. I didn't want to go any farther. I thought about packing up right then and there, but I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it really was some animal. Maybe my tired brain had made the prints look worse than they were. I stayed another day, but I kept my fire bigger and closer to the tent that night. That evening, I noticed how quickly it got dark. It wasn't gradual, it was like the light just dropped out of the sky all at once. The woods turned black, and the air got cold fast. I sat by the fire, eating a bar, when I heard something again, faint but familiar. The same dragging sound, the same soft steps in the leaves. I froze mid-bite. The noise circled the camp slowly, always just far enough that I couldn't see anything in the light. It didn't move like an animal. It sounded like someone pacing, keeping a distance. I stared into the dark until my eyes burned. Then I saw something, or someone. At the edge of the trees, about 30 feet away, there was a figure. It was standing completely still. The firelight barely reached it, but I could tell it was tall, maybe 6.5 feet. Its arms seemed too long, almost reaching its knees. Its head was tilted a little to one side, like it was trying to study me. I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak. The thing didn't move. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I could see pale skin, maybe dirt-covered, and what looked like tangled hair hanging down. For a long time, neither of us moved. Then it stepped back into the dark, soundless this time. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat in the tent with a knife in my hand, staring at the flap, waiting for it to move. It never did, but I heard the noises off and on, crunches, dragging, breathing until sunrise. The next morning, I packed everything fast. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to get out. When I turned the truck around to leave, I noticed something in the dirt behind where I'd parked. The same prints again. This time there were more of them, circling the tent site, overlapping, some smaller, some large. One print stopped only a few inches from where my head would have been when I slept. The drive back felt longer than before. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow between the trees felt like something was there, following me. When I finally got to pavement again, I stopped at a gas station just to breathe. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold my drink. The cashier asked if I was okay, and I just nodded. I didn't know what to say. For weeks after that, I couldn't stop thinking about that figure, the way it stood there, watching me, almost human but not right. I tried to tell myself it was just some guy out there, maybe a hermit, maybe someone on drugs, but that didn't make sense. There were no camps, no vehicles, nothing out there for miles. I looked up reports later about strange sightings in that area. Missing livestock, weird noises at night, people saying they'd seen figures that mimicked voices or shapes. Most people laughed it off as legends, but every time I remember that sound, the way it moved around my tent, the prints, I can't laugh. I've gone camping plenty of times since then, but never alone, and never anywhere near Kaibab again. Even now, years later, when I wake up in the middle of the night and the house is quiet, I sometimes hear that same slow, uneven step in my head, the sound of something that almost walks like a man but isn't. And I know that whatever was out there that night wasn't a story or a shadow. It was real, and it was watching me. It was the summer of 2018 when I decided to take a short break from the city and go camping alone. I had been working long hours, my head buried in a computer screen, and I needed quiet. Just a few nights of nothing but open fields, wind, and the sound of insects. A friend of mine knew a man who owned a large piece of farmland in southern Illinois, miles away from the nearest town. The land wasn't really used anymore, just old barns, fields of overgrown grass, and a small pond hidden behind a row of trees. It sounded perfect to me. I wanted space, privacy, and peace. I packed up my tent, a small cooler, some canned food, a folding chair, and my sleeping bag. The drive took about 6 hours from Chicago. As I got closer, the roads narrowed from highways to small cracked asphalt paths lined with wildflowers and wooden fences. I saw fewer and fewer houses the deeper I went. By the time I reached the dirt road that led to the farm, my phone had already lost service. The property was massive. The main farmhouse looked abandoned, windows boarded up, the paint on the siding faded and peeling. To the left of it stood an old red barn, its roof slightly caved in, and beyond that stretched wide fields of yellow grass. I parked near a line of oak trees that looked strong enough to block some of the wind. The air smelled faintly of soil and hay. It was quiet, completely quiet, not the kind of quiet you get in a park, but the kind that makes you notice your own breathing. I set up my tent a few hundred feet from the barn, close enough for shelter if it rained, but far enough that the shadows from the barn wouldn't fall over my camp. The sun was hot, but the breeze made it comfortable. I spent the first afternoon walking around the place. The barn door hung open on one hinge, squeaking whenever the wind picked up. Inside, there were piles of hay so old they turned to dust when I stepped on them. A few rusted tools were scattered around, and in one corner was a stack of animal cages, small ones maybe for chickens or rabbits. I found a broken ladder leaning against the wall and climbed up to the loft. From there, I could see over the whole field. The land stretched for what looked like miles, with a few fence posts leaning at odd angles, long since forgotten. As the sun started to go down, I made a small fire and heated up a can of soup. The sky turned orange and then deep red. Fireflies came out and floated above the tall grass. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. I hadn't felt that kind of quiet in years. When it got dark, I crawled into my tent, zipped it shut, and lay back listening to the distant hum of insects. Sometime around midnight, I woke up. I didn't know what had stirred me at first. Then I heard it. A faint sound, like something dragging against the ground, came from somewhere near the barn. I held still, thinking maybe it was an animal. The wind had died completely, and every small noise felt amplified. The dragging sound stopped for a moment, then started again, slower this time. I sat up quietly and unzipped the tent flap just a little. The fire had gone out, and my eyes took a while to adjust to the dark. The barn stood like a black shape against the dim sky. I couldn't see much, but I noticed movement near the open doorway. A faint shape, maybe a person or maybe just shadows. My stomach tightened. I didn't move. After a few minutes, the sound faded away. I told myself it must have been a deer or maybe the wind shifting something loose. Eventually, I fell asleep again, though it was a light, uneasy sleep. The next morning, the first thing I did was check the area around the barn. I found something strange. A set of footprints in the dirt just outside the door. They weren't boots or shoes, bare feet. The prints were small, maybe a child's, but there were too many. They circled the barn, leading toward the field and vanishing into the grass. I stood there for a while, staring at them. There was no house nearby, no sign of anyone else. It made no sense. That day, I tried to focus on normal things. I fished a little in the pond, cooked another can of soup, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself the footprints were old, maybe from the previous owner's kids years ago. But that night, the noise came back. It started around the same time, close to midnight. This time, it wasn't dragging. It was footsteps, slow, uneven footsteps circling my tent. I froze. I didn't breathe. I could hear the grass crunching softly under each step. They went all the way around once, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise itself. My heartbeat felt so loud I thought whoever, or whatever it was, could hear it. Minutes passed. I didn't move until the sound faded into the distance. When morning came, I packed my things fast. I was ready to leave, but as I was rolling up my tent, I noticed something that made me stop cold. On the side of my tent, smeared faintly in dirt, was a handprint. A small one, too small for an adult. I stood there staring at it for a long time. The fingers were thin, the palms small, and the print was low to the ground, as if whoever made it had been crouching. I checked the ground again and saw more of those same barefoot tracks, leading toward the barn and disappearing behind it. I almost left right then, but my curiosity got the better of me. I went back to the barn one last time. The air inside was heavy, thick with the smell of rot. I went around to the back and found an old cellar door half buried under weeds. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The wood was swollen and cracked, but one of the hinges had been recently broken. The door was slightly open, maybe an inch or two. I knelt down and looked inside. The smell hit me immediately, something sour, decaying. It was pitch black. I couldn't see anything past the first few steps leading downward. I listened, holding my breath, and for a few seconds I thought I heard something faint below, like a quiet shuffle or a breath. I backed away slowly. That was enough for me. I didn't go back for the cooler or the folding chair. I threw everything else into the car and left the tent behind. I drove down that dirt road faster than I should have, heart pounding, constantly checking the rearview mirror even though I knew there was nothing there. When I finally reached a gas station about 30 miles away, I pulled over. I sat there for a long time trying to calm down. The station attendant must have thought I looked crazy. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was just squatters, maybe kids living on that property, hiding out, using the barn for shelter. But something about those prints didn't sit right. The number of them, the size, the way they were all over the place like someone had been crawling instead of walking. A week later, I looked up the property online. It had belonged to a man named Roger Tillman, who died in the early 2000s. There was a note in one of the local news archives about him losing his daughter in an accident years before he died. She was 6. The search didn't say much else, just that she went missing one evening and was never found. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw or heard. I've camped plenty of times since then, but never on farmland and never alone. Sometimes I still think about that night. The slow steps, the small handprint on my tent, and that cellar door slightly open. When I close my eyes, I can still see that field, stretching out in every direction, quiet and empty, like nothing ever happened there. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw, and I'll never go back. It was late October 2014 when I decided to take a hunting trip up in the northern part of Montana, near the Bob Marshall Wilderness. I was 28 at the time, still young enough to think I could handle the cold and isolation of the woods by myself. I'd been hunting most of my life, but this trip wasn't really about getting anything specific. It was about clearing my head. I'd been working long weeks at a construction job, barely sleeping, barely eating, just feeling worn down. The quiet of the forest always fixed that for me. I drove up early in the morning, the road twisting through long stretches of pine and spruce, the kind of forest that feels older than anything man could ever build. I remember the smell, that clean, frozen air mixed with resin and wet dirt. I parked my old Silverado at a small pull-off off the logging road, where the gravel faded into mud. From there, it was a 4-mile hike to the spot I'd planned to camp. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun was dipping behind the ridges. I set up camp quickly. Small 2-person tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, and enough gear for 3 days. The air was colder than I'd expected. My breath hung heavy in the air. The ground was hard, crusted with early frost, and the forest around me was quiet in that heavy, dense way that makes you feel like something's watching you. I'd been alone in the woods plenty of times before, but that night had a stillness that sat wrong with me. I cooked some beans and venison I'd packed, ate in silence, then sat by the small fire I'd built. The trees around my camp reached high, black against the faint orange glow of the flames. Every now and then, I'd hear small sounds, a branch snapping, a far-off rustle, normal forest stuff. Still, it made me uneasy. There was no wind, no animal calls, nothing but those sudden, small noises. When I finally crawled into the tent, I lay awake for a long time, listening. Sometime past midnight, I heard something move close, maybe 30 yards away. It wasn't fast like a deer. It was slow, deliberate, heavy. My heartbeat got loud in my ears, and I stayed frozen, listening. It stopped after a while, and I tried convincing myself it was just an elk or maybe a black bear moving through. But bears don't walk that quietly. I woke early, the ground hard and cold under me. My boots were stiff from the frost, and my breath came out in little white clouds. I boiled water for coffee and stood there, staring into the line of trees. There were faint tracks leading out of the clearing, not boots, not hooves. Something bare, human-like, but wider, longer. I crouched down and touched the frozen dirt. The prints looked fresh, pressed deep into the frost. I told myself maybe some camper had passed through during the night, but no one camps this deep without a vehicle nearby, and I hadn't seen another truck for miles. I packed my rifle and decided to scout further uphill. The forest grew thicker as I climbed, full of fallen branches and thick moss. I found some elk sign, droppings mostly, but no real tracks worth following. Still, I kept going. By midday, the air had warmed slightly, and the forest felt less hostile. I was about 2 miles from camp when I caught a smell. Something foul, like rotting meat mixed with wet leaves. It wasn't unusual to smell death in the woods, but this one was stronger, sour. I followed it a little ways until I found what was left of a deer. Bones mostly torn apart, ribs bent outward. The meat had been eaten down to shreds, but the head was still there, eyes gone. Predators eat like that, I thought. Could have been wolves, or a bear. Still, the pattern didn't look right. The bones were cleanly split, not chewed. It looked more like something had broken them apart with force. I didn't stay long. I turned back toward camp, checking over my shoulder more than I wanted to admit. That night, I built a bigger fire and kept my rifle closer. The woods were silent again, like the night before, but heavier. I ate quick and sat with my back to a log, staring into the dark. When I finally crawled into my tent, I kept the zipper halfway open, watching the firelight flicker through the opening. The sound started again around midnight. The same slow, careful steps, closer this time. My chest felt tight, like my heartbeat was echoing inside my head. I stayed completely still. Something moved past the tent, brushing against the fabric so lightly that I almost didn't feel it. Then a crunch, something stepping on a branch right next to me. I held my breath until my chest hurt. The sound lingered for a while, then drifted away into the trees. I don't think I slept again after that. When dawn came, I stepped out with my rifle ready. The fire had burned out to coals, and the forest looked calm again, like nothing had happened. But near the edge of my camp, in the soft patch of dirt by a tree, I saw it again, the same kind of footprints. Human-shaped, bare. And this time, there were more of them, at least 2 different sets. I packed up fast. My plan was to head back to the truck and just leave. Hunting didn't seem worth it anymore. I slung my pack over my shoulder and started down the trail, moving quick. The woods were quiet again, but that silence didn't feel peaceful now. It felt like a warning. Every few minutes, I stopped and listened, half expecting to hear footsteps behind me. I didn't, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following. When I got near the last ridge before the valley, I saw movement through the trees. Just a flicker, something dark between the pines. I froze. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then I saw it again, closer. A figure, tall, thin, moving awkwardly, like it wasn't used to walking. I couldn't make out the face, just the shape. It looked human, but something about the way it moved made my stomach twist. I raised my rifle, not to shoot, but just to steady myself. The figure stopped. We stood there, motionless, maybe 40 yards apart. The air felt heavier than before, pressing down on me. Then it turned, not fast, just turned, and stepped back into the trees. I didn't wait to see where it went. I started walking faster, nearly jogging by the time I reached the clearing where I'd parked. When I got to the truck, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely fit the key in the ignition. I didn't look back once. I drove straight out, tires spinning in the mud, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The road was empty. The woods faded behind me. That night, I stayed at a cheap motel in Kalispell. I remember standing under the shower for a long time, trying to get warm, but I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. Human, but not quite. Too long, too wide, and the way that thing moved through the trees, like it wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't go back to that area after that trip. For a while, I tried convincing myself it had just been some hermit or poacher living off the land. Maybe someone half crazy from being alone too long. That's what I tell people if they ask why I stopped hunting up north. But there's one thing that still eats at me. When I was cleaning my truck a week later, I noticed something on the back bumper. A handprint. Large, bare, pressed into the thin layer of dried mud. It wasn't mine. The fingers were longer than they should have been, and the spacing was wrong. I scrubbed it off, but for weeks afterward, I kept waking up at night thinking I heard footsteps outside my window. I haven't been camping alone since. I went camping alone in southern France in the summer of 2018. I had been traveling through Europe for a few weeks after finishing university and wanted a break from cities and hostels. I found a quiet, cheap campsite near a small village outside of Carcassonne, surrounded by forest and old farmlands. It wasn't an official site, more like a patch of private land that a farmer allowed people to use if they paid him a small fee. There were only 2 or 3 other tents scattered around, but they were far apart from mine. I picked a spot near a stream under some tall poplar trees. The place felt peaceful during the day, warm sunlight, faint buzzing of insects, soft smell of pine and dry soil. The first day passed quietly. I walked around the nearby hills, cooked some pasta on my small gas stove, and read a book until it got dark. When the night came, the temperature dropped fast, and everything went silent except for the slow, steady sound of the stream beside my tent. I lay there for a while, just listening. There's something strange about silence in the woods. It makes every tiny noise feel important. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps, very faint, crunching softly through the dried leaves. At first, I thought it was just an animal, a deer or maybe a stray dog. I didn't move, but I could tell the sound wasn't random. It was slow, deliberate. A few steps, then a pause, then a few more, like someone trying to move quietly. My tent was zipped shut, and I could only see dim light from the moon pressing through the fabric. The footsteps stopped close to the stream, maybe 10 meters away. I held my breath and waited. After a minute, they faded away. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe another camper walking around, or someone from the village taking a shortcut through the woods. But it still made me uneasy. The next morning, when I went to fetch water, I saw footprints in the soft mud near the stream. They were small, barefoot prints, clearly human. The toes were pressed deep into the ground like whoever it was had been standing still there for a while. I tried not to think too much about it. I spent the rest of the day biking to a nearby town to buy some bread and canned food. When I got back late in the afternoon, I noticed that one of my tent flaps was unzipped. I was sure I had closed it before leaving. Nothing seemed stolen, but my sleeping bag had been moved, and my backpack was lying open. It felt like someone had gone through my things. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing little sounds outside, sticks snapping, faint rustling near the trees. Around 2 a.m., I opened the zipper just a bit to peek outside. The moon was out, washing everything in pale light. For a while, I didn't see anything. Then I spotted movement near the trees across the stream. It was a woman. She was standing half hidden behind a trunk, facing my direction. She wasn't close enough for me to see her face clearly, but she looked thin, with long hair hanging down the sides of her head. She was wearing a pale dress, almost white, that looked dirty and torn at the bottom. She stood completely still, her body slightly turned like she was trying to look at me without stepping forward. My chest felt heavy, and my hands were sweating. I froze, staring at her for what felt like minutes, until I couldn't handle it anymore. I zipped the tent back up and lay down, pretending to sleep, though my heart was beating too fast for me to actually rest. When the sun rose, I got out quickly. There was no one there. I looked across the stream, no footprints this time, but the grass was flattened in one spot like someone had been standing there. I packed my stuff slowly that morning, thinking about leaving, but I convinced myself again that maybe she was just some local woman wandering, maybe lost, maybe living off-grid. I didn't want to sound paranoid. The following night, the air was still and heavy. Not even the crickets made noise. I was sitting by my small campfire, eating bread and tuna, when I felt that same uneasy sense that someone was watching me. I turned around and saw her again. This time she was closer, maybe 15 meters away, standing at the edge of the trees. She wasn't moving. The firelight flickered across her face for a second, and I saw that her eyes looked hollow, dark under the shadows, and her skin was pale like she hadn't seen sunlight for a long time. She looked filthy, her hair tangled, her dress stained brown and gray. She didn't do anything. She just stood there, facing me, hands hanging by her sides. My throat went dry. I didn't speak or move. I could feel my whole body tense. After a while, she stepped back slowly into the trees and disappeared. I didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, I decided I was done. I started packing everything up fast. But when I unzipped my tent, I saw something that stopped me completely. On the ground right in front of the entrance, there was a piece of bread, part of a baguette, cut cleanly in half. It wasn't mine. I hadn't left it there. It was like someone had placed it there carefully. I looked around again. The woods were quiet. The air smelled faintly of smoke, but not from my fire. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a soft crack, like someone stepping on a branch. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed everything inside, and left the tent behind. I didn't even roll it up, just started walking fast toward the dirt road that led back to the village. The walk back felt endless. Every sound behind me made me turn my head. At one point, I thought I saw someone far down the path, walking behind me, but when I stopped to look properly, there was nothing. When I finally reached the village, I felt my whole body relax for the first time in 2 days. I went straight to a small cafe and sat there until I stopped shaking. Later that day, I talked to the farmer who owned the land, trying to explain that I'd seen someone out there. He seemed surprised but not shocked. He told me in broken English that a woman had lived in those woods years ago, alone in a shack after her husband died. She used to walk near the campsite sometimes, looking for food or bottles to sell, but she disappeared after a bad winter a few years back. He said people sometimes still claimed to see her wandering, but he laughed it off, saying it was probably just stories. I didn't laugh. I just nodded, thanked him, and left. I stayed that night in a cheap motel near the highway. I remember lying in bed, feeling strange relief that I was behind a locked door again. A week later, I was back home in England. I tried to forget the whole thing, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she had stood there, watching silently, the strange piece of bread left outside my tent. I kept wondering if she had been homeless, living somewhere in the woods, or if she had just been curious, lonely maybe. But the thought that stayed with me most was how quietly she moved, how close she must have come while I slept, and how easily she could have done anything she wanted while I lay there unaware. It made me realize how fragile that thin layer of safety really is when you're out there alone. You think you're camping, surrounded by nature, away from people, but sometimes the scariest thing out there isn't the wild. It's the people who live unnoticed in it, the ones who have stopped being seen but still see you. I haven't gone camping alone since then. Every time I think about it, I picture that pale woman standing still among the trees, her eyes fixed on me like she had been waiting for something. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to find out. I went camping alone for the first time in the summer of 2013. I was 24 then, living in Northern Oregon, working a boring warehouse job that ran from Monday to Friday. That year had felt heavier than usual. Too much routine, too much noise, too many people around all the time. I needed a weekend to disappear. I packed my tent, sleeping bag, small cooler, and an old lantern into my beat-up Subaru and drove toward the edge of the Deschutes National Forest. The area I picked wasn't a popular campsite. I'd found it on an old hiking forum. Someone mentioned a clearing about 3 miles off the main trail where few people ever went. I wanted quiet, real quiet. I wanted to wake up and not hear cars or phones, just wind and trees. The hike to the spot took me most of the afternoon. The air smelled like pine and damp soil, and the trail was narrow and muddy in places. I remember my shirt sticking to my back, sweat soaking through, and the sound of distant thunder rolling over the hills. It wasn't supposed to rain that weekend, at least according to the forecast, but Oregon weather doesn't follow rules. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun was hanging low. The spot was perfect, flat ground, surrounded by thick trees, and just close enough to a small creek that I could hear the trickling water. I set up my tent, unpacked, collected some dry wood, and made a small fire before dark. I ate a sandwich sitting by the flames, listening to the quiet between gusts of wind. Every now and then, I'd hear branches snap somewhere out in the woods, but I didn't think much of it. It's the forest. There's always something moving. When night came, the air turned colder than I expected. I crawled into my sleeping bag and turned off the lantern. I lay there for a long time, staring at the thin nylon of the tent roof, listening. The forest has a way of making you feel small when it's dark. Every sound feels closer, sharper. I could hear the creek, the wind pushing through the trees, the occasional hoot of an owl. Then came something else, something heavier. It was a sound like slow, uneven steps on soft ground. I froze, holding my breath. The steps stopped for a moment, then started again, closer this time. My first thought was a deer, maybe an elk. But the rhythm was wrong, too slow, too careful. It stopped again, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I reached for my flashlight, turned it on, and aimed it toward the tent wall. The beam showed nothing but shadows of trees swaying outside. I told myself to relax. I must have been imagining it. But then something brushed against the side of the tent, light but definite, like a hand or an animal's body pressing against the fabric. My chest tightened. I stayed still, not daring to breathe. After a few seconds, it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, flashlight in hand, every nerve wired. The steps didn't come back, and after a while, the forest went silent again. When the first light of morning came, I got out and checked the ground around the tent. There were footprints, not boots or shoes, bare feet. I counted at least 7 distinct prints circling my tent. Some were partial, like whoever made them had been stepping carefully, trying not to make noise. The prints were small, but not like a child's, maybe a woman's size, maybe a teenager's. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself someone else might have camped nearby and wandered through my area. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever it was had been watching me while I slept or tried to sleep. I decided to stay one more night, mostly because I didn't want to admit how nervous I was. I hiked down to the creek, filled my water bottle, washed my face, and tried to clear my head. I didn't see anyone the whole day. By evening, clouds had rolled in again. The air grew heavy and still, the kind of stillness that comes right before rain. I built another fire, cooked a small meal, and tried to stay calm. I kept glancing into the trees, half expecting to see someone standing there. When rain started falling, I put out the fire and retreated to my tent. The sound of the rain on the nylon roof was almost comforting. I started to feel stupid for being scared. Then, sometime around midnight, I woke up to the sound of the rain stopping. It was that sudden silence that wakes you instantly, like your brain knows something changed. The air felt thicker, colder. I couldn't hear the creak anymore. No wind, no insects, just silence. Then came the soft crunching sound again. This time it was closer, moving around the tent slowly. I grabbed the flashlight again, hand shaking. The steps paused, and I could hear faint breathing, slow, uneven. I didn't move. The sound came from just outside the tent flap. For maybe 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then something tugged at the zipper. Not yanked, just pulled slightly, like testing it. I jolted upright and shouted. The sound came out rough and cracked, but it worked. The footsteps retreated quickly, fading into the trees. I kept the light on and sat there for what felt like hours, waiting for it to come back. It never did. When morning came, I packed up immediately. The air smelled like wet leaves, and fog hung low over the trees. I looked around the clearing one last time before leaving. The footprints were there again, this time leading right up to the tent entrance and then back into the woods. I hiked out fast, barely stopping to drink water. My legs were shaking the whole time. When I finally reached the car, I locked the doors before even sitting down. The moment I turned the ignition and heard the engine start, I felt a kind of relief that's hard to explain. As I drove down the dirt road toward the highway, I saw something on the edge of the tree line, a shape standing still between the pines. I slowed down, trying to make sense of it. It looked like a person, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes. They didn't move, just stood there, watching the car pass. I couldn't see their face. I didn't stop. I just kept driving until the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror. When I got home that evening, I unpacked everything in the driveway. My tent still had small streaks of mud where the hand, or whatever it was, had brushed against it. I threw it out the next day. I didn't tell anyone what happened. It sounded crazy even to me. For weeks after, I had trouble sleeping. Every little noise outside my window made me tense up. Sometimes, in those sleepless nights, I'd think about those bare footprints circling the tent, the slow breathing outside, and how whoever it was had been careful, so careful, not to wake me at first. The strangest part came about a month later. I was scrolling through local news online when I found an article about a missing woman. Her name was Allison Grant, 32, last seen hiking alone near the same area I'd camped in. They said her car was found parked near the trailhead, but there were no signs of her anywhere. Her photo stopped me cold. The face looked familiar, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was just my mind making connections it wanted to make, but something in my gut twisted when I saw her eyes. I never went camping alone again after that. Every now and then, when I drive through that part of Oregon, I still think about that night. The soft rain, the silence that followed, and the sound of something human breathing just a few feet away from me in the dark. And I still wonder if she was out there that night too, lost or hiding, or watching me from the edge of the trees, waiting for something I'll never understand. It was the summer of 2018 when I decided to go camping alone in the mountains of northern Idaho. I had been planning that trip for months. I wanted peace, a quiet place away from work and people. I had gone camping many times before, but this time felt different because the place I picked was remote, somewhere deep beyond the marked trails. I drove an old silver Tacoma pickup, the kind with a small camper shell in the back. I loaded it with a tent, a sleeping bag, a portable stove, food, a folding chair, and enough firewood to last me a few days. I also brought my rifle, not because I expected to hunt, but because you never know what's out there. Bears, wolves, or sometimes people who don't belong that deep in the woods. The sky had been gray since morning, and by the time I reached the dirt road that led to the clearing I'd marked on my map, it had started to drizzle. The rain wasn't heavy at first, just small drops tapping against the windshield, but the deeper I drove, the harder it fell. The road turned muddy, and my tires kicked up thick, wet clumps of dirt. By the time I reached the clearing, it was nearly evening. The rain had picked up, falling in sheets, steady and cold. I parked near a group of pine trees and started setting up camp. The ground was soft and uneven, my boots sinking slightly with each step. It took me longer than usual to get the tent up because the wind kept pulling the fabric, and my hands were cold and wet. When I was finally done, I made a small fire under a tarp I stretched between two trees. The smoke rose unevenly in the rain, the smell of wet wood mixing with the sharp scent of pine. The forest around me was thick, too thick. Even in daylight, you couldn't see far beyond the tree line. The sound of the rain drowned out almost everything else. After eating a small meal, I sat near the fire and listened. The forest felt heavy, muffled by the rain. There were no insects buzzing, no distant calls of animals. Just the endless hiss of water falling through branches. I tried not to think too much about it. Silence like that always gets under your skin when you're alone. When it got dark, I climbed into my tent. The sound of rain hitting the fabric was constant, almost rhythmic. I remember lying there, staring at the faint light of my lantern, feeling a strange kind of calm. But that didn't last long. Around midnight, I woke up. It wasn't the rain that woke me. It was something else. A sound. Faint, but sharp enough to pull me out of sleep. Came from outside, somewhere near the trees. It wasn't an animal noise. It sounded like something metallic, like the quick click of metal hitting metal. I stayed still for a long time, listening. The rain was still falling, heavier now, but between the gusts of wind, I heard it again, that short, unnatural click. I thought it could be the wind knocking something loose from my truck, or maybe the buckle of my cooler shifting in the rain. I unzipped the tent halfway and shined my flashlight toward the clearing. The beam of light hit the wet ground, the fire pit, the truck. Nothing unusual. I couldn't see far enough to the trees, though. The rain reflected the light, making it hard to see anything beyond a few feet. I crawled out anyway, my boots sinking in the mud. The cold hit me instantly, soaking through my jacket. I walked toward the truck, sweeping the light around. Everything looked normal until I reached the back. The cooler I'd left beside the tailgate was open. The latch was unhooked. I knew for sure I'd locked it earlier. I remember because I had to shove it down hard to make it click. At first, I thought maybe a raccoon or something had managed to open it, but there were no claw marks, no signs of food dragged away. The lid was just open, sitting there, clean. I stood there for a while, flashlight in one hand, rifle in the other, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. I shut the cooler, latched it again, and went back to the tent. I told myself it was probably just the rain and my imagination. I wanted to believe that. When I got back inside, I left the lantern off this time. I lay there listening again. For a long time, it was just rain. Then, after maybe 20 minutes, I heard it again. Not the click this time. It was a sound like something brushing lightly against fabric. My tent fabric. My whole body went still. The sound came from the right side, near the back. It was slow, steady, like fingers sliding against wet canvas. I held my breath. It lasted maybe 5 seconds and then stopped. I waited. The rain kept falling. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I finally grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the side where I'd heard it. But all I saw was the wet fabric shaking from the wind. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, sitting up with my rifle across my lap. The rain didn't stop, not once. When daylight finally came, Everything outside was gray and dripping. The fire pit was flooded. The ground was a pool of mud, and the trees looked almost black against the sky. I walked around camp, checking everything. The cooler was closed this time. The only thing that looked off was a set of boot prints, not mine, about 20 feet from my tent. They were half washed away by the rain, but I could still see the shape, bigger than mine. And there were at least 3 distinct prints before they disappeared into the mud near the tree line. That was enough for me. I started packing right away. My hands were shaking the whole time, not from the cold but from something else. That deep, sick feeling in your stomach when you know something isn't right. By the time I got everything loaded, it was late morning. The rain was still steady, but I didn't care. I got into the truck and started the engine. For a moment, I looked out toward the trees, half expecting to see someone standing there watching. There was nothing, just the rain falling in long, silent sheets. As I drove out, I kept looking in the rearview mirror. The road was narrow, full of puddles, and the forest felt endless. I didn't relax until I reached the main gravel road that led back toward town. When I finally stopped at a small diner on the way home, I looked at the back of my truck again. The cooler was gone, completely gone. The latch hadn't broken, the whole thing was missing. I knew I had locked it down with a bungee cord before leaving. I checked twice. I just stood there in the rain, staring at the empty spot in the truck bed. I couldn't explain it. Maybe someone followed me out there. Maybe they were already camping nearby and saw me. I don't know. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. That night, I unpacked everything, checked every latch, every bag. I kept thinking about those prints and how clean that cooler latch looked. Someone had opened it carefully, like they didn't want to make noise. I never went camping alone again after that. Whenever I think about it, I don't imagine ghosts or monsters. Just a person, standing out there in the rain, watching quietly as I slept. Because out there, in a place that remote, the scariest thing isn't what you can't see. It's knowing that something or someone was close enough to touch your tent without making a sound. And the worst part is not knowing if they ever left. It was the summer of 2018 when I decided to take a solo camping trip through southern France. I had saved up for months, planned everything out carefully, and wanted some quiet away from work and noise. I was 26, and this was something I'd been wanting to do since college. Just me, a tent, and the open countryside. I picked a remote spot near a small village outside of Carcassonne, surrounded by rolling hills and scattered patches of forest. The place felt empty but peaceful, and the air had that warm, dry smell that comes after long summer days. I parked my small rental car off a dirt road and hiked down a narrow trail for about half an hour before finding a flat clearing near a creek. The water made a soft, trickling sound, and I could see the glow of the sunset through the trees. I set up my tent, made a small fire, and cooked a simple dinner from a can of beans and some bread I bought earlier that day. Everything felt calm and normal, that kind of silence where you hear only insects and the occasional bird. The first night passed easily. I woke up a few times because of small noises outside. Maybe animals moving through the grass, but nothing unusual. The second day, I hiked deeper into the woods, took photos, and enjoyed the quiet. I didn't see anyone. The whole day felt like I had the entire valley to myself. But by the third night, something started to feel off. It began when I went to gather wood around sunset. I was a few hundred feet away from camp when I noticed footprints in the soft dirt. They weren't mine, they were too large and too fresh. They looked like boot prints heading in the direction of my campsite. I froze for a second, looking around, but the woods were still. I told myself someone probably passed through earlier in the day. Maybe a farmer or another camper. Still, it left me uneasy. I carried the wood back and tried to forget about it. I made dinner, watched the sky turn dark purple, and sat by the fire. That's when I noticed a flicker of light through the trees. Far away, but definitely there. It looked like another fire, maybe half a mile off. I didn't remember seeing anyone nearby when I hiked earlier, so that meant someone had set up camp close to mine sometime that evening. It shouldn't have bothered me, but something about it did. The light didn't move like a normal campfire. It seemed to glow steady, too steady, almost like a flashlight held still. I stared at it for a while until it went out. After that, I decided to go to sleep, though I didn't rest much. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. It was completely quiet. No wind, no bugs, just the sound of my own heartbeat. Then I heard it, soft, deliberate footsteps outside my tent. Slow, crunching on the dry leaves. I held my breath, not daring to move. The steps circled around the tent once, stopped, then faded away. I lay there frozen for maybe an hour, waiting to hear more, but it stayed silent after that. In the morning, when I finally unzipped the tent, I saw clear footprints in the dirt, boot prints again. They stopped about 10 feet from the tent and turned back toward the woods. I packed my things right away, my hands shaking slightly. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't ignore what I saw. I decided to move camp a few kilometers east, closer to the road. I hiked for about 2 hours before finding another spot, more open and less surrounded by trees. I could see the hills in the distance and felt safer being in the open. That day passed quietly. I kept scanning the tree line every so often, half expecting to see someone watching. Nothing. That night, I stayed awake longer than usual, sitting by the fire until after midnight. The sky was clear, stars scattered everywhere. I was finally starting to relax when I heard something again. Faint snapping sounds from the darkness. This time I could tell it wasn't an animal. Too steady, too cautious. I stared into the black tree line until my eyes hurt. Then I saw him. There was a man standing just beyond the reach of the firelight. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could make out his shape. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket and what looked like a hat. He wasn't moving, just standing there, half hidden behind a tree. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't say a word or move. I just watched him. After a few seconds, maybe 10, maybe 30, he turned slowly and walked back into the woods. I sat there the rest of the night, every sound making me jump. I didn't sleep at all. When the sun came up, I took down my tent and stuffed everything into my pack in less than 5 minutes. I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. The only problem was that my car was still several kilometers away, down that narrow trail. I kept my knife out the whole walk back, scanning the trees constantly. The woods looked normal again, birds chirping, sunlight breaking through the leaves, but it didn't feel normal anymore. Halfway back, I came across something that made my stomach twist. A small pile of rocks stacked in a neat triangle shape, right in the middle of the trail. It wasn't there before. Someone had made it recently. It wasn't something nature did, and it was placed perfectly in the center of the path like a message. I walked around it and didn't look back. When I finally reached the spot where I had parked the car, I stopped dead. My car was there, but something was wrong. Both doors were open. The passenger seat had been pushed forward, and the contents of my glove compartment were dumped out onto the ground. Maps, receipts, my small flashlight. Whoever had been near my camp had been here too. I scanned the area but didn't see anyone. The entire forest felt like it was holding its breath. I threw my backpack in the car, slammed the doors shut, and turned the key. It started after a second try. I drove down that dirt road faster than I should have, bouncing over rocks, the tires sliding on the loose soil. I didn't stop until I hit the main paved road. When I reached a small town about 20 minutes later, I parked near a gas station and just sat there for a while, trying to calm down. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked pale, sweaty, eyes wide like I hadn't slept in days. I went inside, bought water, and asked the clerk if anyone lived near those hills. He said only a few old farms, no official campsites out there anymore. That area wasn't popular. I told myself maybe it was just a thief, someone wandering the woods looking for stuff to steal. But the thing that stuck with me wasn't the stolen gear. Nothing was actually taken. It was how deliberate everything felt. The way the man stood in the dark, how he circled my tent, how he had time to open my car and go through my things but didn't take a single item. Felt like he was just watching. I drove straight to a small motel that night, locked the door, and didn't sleep much anyway. The next morning I checked out early and started heading north, back toward Lyon where my flight would be. The whole drive, I kept looking in the mirror, half expecting to see that man on the side of the road or standing at a distance somewhere along the way. I never did. That was 7 years ago now. I still go hiking sometimes, but I've never camped alone again. I can't. Every time I hear the crunch of leaves behind me or see movement in the corner of my eye, my body locks up the same way it did that night in the woods. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. Maybe he was just a drifter, maybe someone who liked scaring people. But what keeps me awake sometimes is the thought that he didn't want to hurt me. At least not yet. Maybe he was waiting for the right night or the right person. And maybe out there in those hills of southern France, he still is. I went camping alone once in northern Montana, sometime in early October of 2017. I was 31 then, working in construction and tired of city noise, the constant sound of trucks and hammering that never really left my ears even when I tried to sleep. I wanted silence. I wanted to wake up to the sound of wind instead of alarms. I packed my small gray tent, a sleeping bag, a knife, a lighter, some canned food, and a cheap flashlight that I bought from a hardware store. My plan was to spend 3 nights in a small camping area near the Kootenay National Forest, not an official campground, just a patch of open space beside a narrow gravel road that led down toward a lake. The drive was about 6 hours from Missoula. I remember how the air started to feel different the farther I got from the towns. It got heavier, colder. The trees grew taller and thicker, their branches bending over the road like a tunnel. The gravel crunched under my tires, and my phone lost service somewhere around the 4th hour. I didn't care. I wanted to disconnect. I kept driving until I saw a small clearing on the right side of the road, enough space to park my old pickup and set up a tent. By the time I unpacked everything, the sun was already dipping behind the trees. The air smelled like pine and wet dirt. I set up the tent near the tree line, maybe 15 yards from the truck, with a view of the lake that was just visible through the trees. It was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful at first, too quiet. No cars, no planes, not even birds for the first few minutes. Then I started to hear small things. Branches cracking, a few distant owl calls, the soft movement of water hitting the shore. I told myself I'd get used to it. The first night went fine. I built a small fire, ate cold beans from a can, and sat by the flames watching the smoke drift up through the dark trees. The stars were bright, brighter than I'd ever seen before. I went to sleep around 10, listening to the wind slide through the pine needles. I woke up once during the night because I thought I heard footsteps outside the tent. Slow, heavy ones. But when I sat up and listened, it stopped. I waited for a while, then convinced myself it was just the firewood crackling or an animal moving through the brush. I fell back asleep eventually. The next morning, I woke up to a layer of frost on the tent. My breath came out in clouds. I made coffee on a small burner, ate some jerky, and decided to walk around the area. I followed the dirt road for a while, then cut through the trees toward the lake. The ground was soft and muddy in spots, and I noticed boot prints near the water. Not mine. They looked fresh, pressed deep into the wet soil, heading toward the tree-line. I didn't think much of it at first. People came through these woods sometimes, hunters or fishermen maybe. Still, something about how close they were to my camp unsettled me. That day was slow. I read from an old paperback I brought, napped in the sun for a while, and cooked a small meal as evening came. The air got colder much faster than the night before. I built another fire higher this time. The light bounced off the trees in strange ways, like they were moving even when the wind stopped. I sat close to the heat until my back started to hurt from the position. Then I heard it again, footsteps. They came from behind the tent this time, slow and careful. I froze, my hand tight around the handle of my knife. The sound stopped for a few seconds, then started again, just a few feet away. I turned off my flashlight so I could see beyond the glare, staring into the black trees. Nothing. I couldn't even hear breathing or rustling anymore. I waited probably for 10 minutes straight, barely blinking. Finally, I forced myself to get up and circle around the tent with the knife ready. There was nothing, no animal, no person, no movement. But when I walked a little farther, maybe 20 feet into the woods, I found something hanging from a low branch, a piece of torn fabric. It looked like a strip from a jacket sleeve, dark blue or gray, wet from dew. I took it down and looked around again, shining the flashlight in wide sweeps. Still nothing. I went back to the tent and barely slept that night. Every small sound felt close. The next morning, I told myself I'd leave. I started packing up around sunrise, but then I realized I had left my water jug near the lake the day before when I washed my hands. I didn't want to leave it there, so I walked down to get it. The air was cold enough to sting my throat. When I got closer to the water, I saw the jug sitting near a rock where I had left it. But beside it, half buried in mud, was a footprint again. Large, with a deeper heel mark like someone had been standing there watching. The same boots. I picked up the jug and turned to go back, but that's when I saw something else. A cigarette, but still slightly blackened at the end, pressed into the dirt. I hadn't smoked in years. I stood there for a while, trying to figure out when it could have been left. The ground was damp from last night's frost, so it couldn't have been long. By the time I reached my camp, I knew I wasn't staying another night. I stuffed everything into the truck, not even folding the tent properly. When I started the engine, I noticed the gas gauge was lower than I remembered. I knew exactly how much gas I had left when I parked. Half a tank, but now it was a little above a quarter. Either I misread it or someone had siphoned some out during the night. The thought made my stomach turn. I started driving, following the gravel road back toward the highway. The forest seemed endless in the daylight, like I was going in circles. After about 15 minutes, I saw something that made my hands tighten on the wheel. A small campsite on the left side of the road, maybe half a mile from where I'd stayed. There was a blue tarp tied between two trees, a small fire ring with ash, and a folding chair facing the road. No car, no person, just that chair and a few empty beer cans beside it. I slowed down but didn't stop. I just kept staring as I passed. Something about that setup felt off, too temporary, like someone had left in a hurry but could be back any second. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw movement behind the tarp, but I didn't turn around to check. The road went on for another hour before I reached the highway. Once I hit the pavement, I didn't stop until I reached a small gas station in Libby. My hands were shaking when I got out. The attendant asked if I was okay, but I just nodded and filled the tank to the top. When I went to clean the windshield, I noticed something strange on the passenger side mirror. A greasy fingerprint, smeared and recent. I hadn't touched that side of the truck since I arrived at the campsite. That night, I stayed in a cheap roadside motel instead of driving home. I kept thinking about the boot prints, the missing gas, the sound of steps in the dark. I tried to convince myself it could have been anyone, a hunter, a lost hiker, maybe someone living off the grid. But whoever it was, they had come close. Too close. When I got home the next day, I unpacked my gear in the garage. As I folded the tent, I found something small tangled in one of the cords. A zip tie, half cut, the kind used to secure equipment or seal bags. I hadn't packed anything like that. I threw it away immediately, but I couldn't stop thinking about what it meant. Someone had been near my things, maybe even touching them while I slept. I never went camping again after that. Every time I drive past a stretch of woods or see a tent in someone's backyard, I still hear that slow crunch of footsteps outside the nylon wall. It's strange how silence can be louder than any scream when you're deep in the woods. I didn't see who it was, and maybe that's what keeps it stuck in my head, the not knowing. But I do know one thing for sure. I wasn't alone out there, not for a single night. It was late September of 2019 when my wife, Rachel, and I decided to spend a weekend camping near the edge of the Huron National Forest in Michigan. We'd been working nonstop for months, barely seeing each other except at night before bed. The plan was to switch off our phones, stay out of contact, and just enjoy the quiet for a few days. The drive from our town took almost 6 hours, most of it through empty roads lined with endless pines. By the time we reached the small dirt turnoff that led to the camping area, the sun was low and orange, cutting through the trees in long, dusty beams. The air smelled sharp, like wet bark and cold soil. The campground wasn't an official one, just an open clearing that locals used from time to time. It had no cabins, no restrooms, no signs. We picked a spot close to a narrow creek that ran behind the trees. The sound of the water was steady and soft, almost like white noise. Rachel said it would help us sleep better. I agreed and started unloading the car while she laid out the tent poles and tarp. We'd brought a medium-sized tent, 2 sleeping bags, a small cooler, and an old camping stove that barely worked. It took me almost 20 minutes to get the fire going because the wood was still damp from rain earlier that week. The sky turned pale gray, and by the time we were done setting up, a cool wind had started to move through the trees. We ate simple hot dogs, chips, and canned beans warmed up over the little fire. The quiet felt strange. At home, there was always background noise. Traffic, neighbors, the hum of the fridge. Here, all I heard was the wind, the crackle of the fire, and the occasional rush of water from the creek. As night settled in, the air grew colder. We sat in our folding chairs, wrapped in jackets, watching the fire fade into red embers. The moon wasn't visible. Thick clouds had covered the sky. The darkness in the woods was almost solid, like a wall that started just past the light of our campfire. Every now and then, I'd hear a distant rustling, maybe an animal moving through leaves. It didn't bother me much. It's the woods, after all. But Rachel looked uneasy. She kept glancing at the treeline behind the creek. Around midnight, the temperature dropped fast. My hands were numb, so we decided to crawl into the tent. I zipped it up tight, leaving just a small vent open. The sound of the creek mixed with a light breeze brushing against the nylon. Rachel fell asleep quickly, her soft breathing steady beside me. I lay awake longer, my mind replaying faint noises outside. The shifting leaves, the creak of branches, the occasional snapping twig. I told myself it was just deer or raccoons. Still, something about the way the sounds came and went felt off, like someone walking but stopping every few steps. Sometime after 2 a.m., I finally drifted off, but not for long. A sharp noise woke me, like a boot slipping on wet ground. I stayed still, listening. The fire outside had died hours ago. The only light came from the weak glow of the moon filtering through the thin tent fabric. I could hear the creek faintly, but under it, there was something else. Slow footsteps in the wet dirt, then silence, then another step. My heartbeat thudded in my chest. I strained my ears, barely breathing. It wasn't an animal. Animals move differently, lighter, faster, more scattered. These were human steps, careful, measured. Whoever it was seemed to be circling around the tent. I thought about unzipping the flap, but the idea of shining my flashlight out there and actually seeing someone stopped me cold. I stayed still, listening as the footsteps faded toward the creek. I waited maybe 10 minutes, though it felt like an hour, before the night went silent again. The next morning, the ground was soaked. It had rained sometime before dawn. Rachel didn't hear anything. She said she slept straight through. I walked around the camp to check, pretending I was just stretching. The dirt around the tent had several footprints, boot prints. They weren't mine. The tread was different, deeper, like someone wearing work boots. They led toward the creek and vanished into the mud. I didn't mention it to her. I didn't want her to freak out, and I wasn't even sure what to think myself. Maybe someone passed through in the night, maybe a hunter or hiker. But the tracks were close, too close, just a few feet from our tent. That day, we tried to enjoy ourselves. We took a walk through the woods, followed a narrow path that looped around a ridge, and gathered more firewood. But something felt different. Every sound seemed louder, the distant caw of a crow, the creak of the trees in the wind, even the rush of the creek. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Rachel noticed and told me I was acting strange, though I didn't tell her why. When the sun went down, I built another fire. The smoke hung low and heavy in the damp air. We ate dinner and sat quiet for a while, both of us listening to the woods. The forest that had seemed calm and open during the day now felt closed in, tight, as if the trees were pressing closer around the campsite. Later that night, when Rachel went into the tent to sleep, I stayed up a little longer by the fire. I kept telling myself it was stupid, that the tracks could have been from before we got there. But when I heard something snap again out in the dark, this time closer, maybe 30 feet away, I felt that same cold rush of fear crawl through me. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the trees. The beam caught only wet branches and mist. I sat there for maybe another half hour before finally going inside. I zipped the tent and lay beside Rachel, listening again. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a faint metallic clinking sound. It took me a second to realize it was coming from outside, from near the car. It sounded like someone testing the door handle. I froze. The keys were inside my backpack near my feet. I reached over slowly and felt for it. My pulse hammered in my ears. The sound stopped. Then I heard soft steps again, moving away, back toward the woods. That was it. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping a small camping knife, waiting for any sound. When light finally came, I stepped outside. The ground around the car was covered in boot prints. The door handles had smudges of mud on them. Whoever it was had tried to open them. Rachel came out a few minutes later and saw me standing there. I finally told her what had happened both nights. She didn't say anything for a while, just stared at the prints. Then she packed her bag without a word. We left within the hour. On the drive back, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror. The forest thinned out as we neared the highway, but the uneasy feeling didn't leave. That night at home, I unpacked the car and noticed something I hadn't before. The small cooler, which I had left on the picnic table before we went to sleep, wasn't ours anymore. Ours had a red lid. The one in the car had a blue one, same size, same brand, but not ours. Inside were 2 unopened cans of beans, a lighter, and an old pocket knife. We never went back to that spot. Sometimes, when I think about those nights, I still wonder if it was just some drifter, maybe someone living in the woods, maybe someone watching us from the dark. Whatever it wasn't the forest that scared me. It was realizing how easily someone can walk right up to you in the middle of nowhere, how close they can get without saying a single word, and how you might never even know they were there until morning. It was early October 2014. The air had started to turn cold at night, the kind of chill that seeps through your jacket and makes the silence of open land feel even wider. I was 27 back then, and I had driven out to a rural part of Nebraska with the idea of spending a weekend camping near an old, abandoned farm my uncle used to own. It wasn't some dramatic plan. I just wanted some quiet time. No phone, no noise, no people. I'd grown up visiting that farm when it was still running, and even though it had been empty for over a decade, I still knew the land well. The house was long gone, torn down years ago, but the barn still stood, half-rotted, its roof sagging on one side and its paint stripped by wind and sun. I parked my truck at the edge of the dirt road and walked in with my gear. The grass was tall, dry, and whispering against my jeans as I made my way toward the barn. The sun was setting, that orange-red kind that stretches shadows across the fields. I set up my small tent not too far from the barn, close enough to have some wind protection but not inside, because the place smelled of mold and mouse droppings. I remember laying out my sleeping bag, lighting a small fire, and cooking a can of chili I'd brought. The silence there was heavy. You don't realize how much background sound cities have until you're in a place like that. Out there, you could hear the faintest creak of wood, the tiny movements of grass, even the slow ticking of metal cooling down after the fire died. After eating, I sat near the fire and looked at the stars. The sky was open and huge, with no lights around to wash it out. It was peaceful in a way that made me feel small. Around 10 p.m., the air dropped colder, so I put out the fire and climbed into my tent. I could still smell the smoke faintly mixing with the scent of dry hay from the barn. I woke up maybe an hour later. It wasn't because of a noise at first. It was because I felt something different in the air. You know how your body just knows when something's off? That's how it felt. The stillness was gone. There was a faint sound, slow, irregular footsteps in the dirt. Not the kind of steady walk of an animal either. It was uneven, sometimes dragging, sometimes stepping heavy. I stayed perfectly still, breathing through my nose, trying not to make the nylon of the tent crinkle. The sound got closer. Then it stopped. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. For a while, there was nothing. No wind, no crickets, just dead silence. I convinced myself it was maybe a deer, or even the wind pushing something loose near the barn. After a few minutes, I forced myself to relax and eventually drifted back into a half-sleep. The next time I woke up, it was because of a crunching sound, closer this time, right outside the tent. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. I didn't move. The sound circled around, slow and cautious. I could hear the faint sound of fabric brushing against something metal. My truck. That's when I realized someone, not an animal, was out there. I waited, frozen, for maybe 10 minutes. Then it went quiet again. The footsteps faded off toward the barn. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, staring into the dark, holding the small knife I kept with my gear. I thought about getting up, packing, and leaving, but walking through a pitch-black field with someone out there didn't seem smart either. So I stayed until dawn. When the sky started turning pale gray, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. My breath came out in small clouds. The ground was damp with dew. Everything looked normal, almost too normal, like nothing had happened. But then I saw them. Footprints. Human ones. They circled my tent, messy and uneven, like someone had been staggering or dragging one leg. The dirt near my truck showed smudges of dried mud along the driver's side door, as if someone had touched it with filthy hands. I checked the doors, still locked. Nothing missing. I told myself it was some drunk farmhand or a local wanderer passing through. Still, I couldn't shake the thought of how close they had been, how quietly they moved. I decided to stay one more night, mostly to prove to myself that I wasn't scared. That was a mistake. That day, I explored the property a bit. Behind the barn was a smaller shed I'd never gone into as a kid. The roof had collapsed halfway, and inside it smelled like wet earth and rust. Old farming tools were scattered around, broken shovels, chains, a dented gas can. On the ground, half buried in dirt, was what looked like a blanket or tarp. I pulled it out and realized it wasn't a blanket. It was a coat, heavy, canvas type, covered in dark stains that looked old. It unsettled me, but I told myself it was probably just some forgotten work gear. I tossed it back and went about the day trying to keep busy. I cooked again before sunset, built a small fire, and watched the fields go dark. Around midnight, I was still awake, sitting by the dying fire, when I heard it again, the crunch of steps, faint, from the direction of the barn. My first thought was maybe an animal again, but the pattern was too slow. I turned my flashlight toward the barn, and for a second I caught something, the edge of movement near one of the broken planks. It was gone as soon as the light hit it. That was enough. I decided I wasn't waiting to see who it was this time. I packed what I could in my truck, tossed the rest in the bed, and got in. The engine took a second too long to start, and when it finally did, I saw something in my mirror. A shape standing halfway in the open of the barn. It was a man, or at least I think it was. Thin, tall, wearing what looked like that same canvas coat I'd found earlier. His head was tilted slightly, like he was listening. He didn't move as I drove off. I didn't stop until I hit the paved road miles away. I parked at a gas station, sat in the lot until sunrise, and finally drove home. A week later, I went back with my cousin during the day. I wanted to see if maybe it had just been someone camping out there, maybe a squatter. When we reached the barn, the door was open again. Inside, everything was as I remembered, except for one thing. In the dirt near the back wall, where the floorboards had rotted away, there was a set of muddy footprints. Bare footprints. They led from the middle of the barn straight toward the area where my tent had been. The prints weren't mine. They were larger, longer, with deep impressions at the heel, like whoever made them had been dragging one leg. There were no signs of anyone living there. No food, no bedding, nothing. Just the prints, ending abruptly a few feet from where I'd camped. We left without saying anything. I never went back to that property again. Years later, when I mentioned it to a local farmer, he told me a man had gone missing around that area in the early 2000s. A hired hand who used to work on nearby land. They never found him. He was last seen walking down the same dirt road that led past my uncle's old farm. I don't know what I saw or who that was. Maybe it was someone still living rough out there, someone not right in the head, or maybe just a stranger passing through. But every time I think about it, what unsettles me most isn't what I saw, it's what I didn't. That silence, that stillness, like the whole land was holding its breath. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that man standing in the barn doorway, the way he didn't move, didn't chase, didn't speak, just watched. Like he was waiting for something. I still camp sometimes, but never on farmland, and never alone. It was early September of 2018 when my friend Ben and I decided to go camping out near the foothills of western Montana. We were both 24, fresh out of college, tired of the city noise, and wanted a weekend away from phones, traffic, and people. Ben had found a quiet camping spot on a map, somewhere deep near a place called Miller Creek. It wasn't an official campground, just a clearing near the water that locals used sometimes. I had never been there before, but he swore it was perfect. We left on a Friday morning, our truck filled with gear, a small tent, sleeping bags, a cooler of food, a couple of lanterns, and a few tools. The drive took almost 4 hours, most of it smooth highway, until the road turned into a bumpy dirt path. There were no signs, just open woods on both sides, thick pine trees, and that steady, lonely sound of wind brushing through the branches. Felt far, really far. We found the clearing around 3 p.m. It was quiet, except for the distant trickle of the creek. The ground was flat, soft with pine needles, and surrounded by trees that looked untouched for decades. No cell service, no people, just open air and silence. We parked the truck a few yards away, set up our tent, and started a small fire pit. It felt peaceful, like the kind of isolation we wanted. By dusk, the fire was glowing. The creek sounded steady in the background, and the air smelled like damp wood and smoke. I remember thinking it was perfect until I started noticing small things. At first, it was just a faint sound from the woods, something like branches snapping. I brushed it off as a deer or maybe a raccoon. But when I looked toward the sound, it felt like the shadows moved. I couldn't see anything clear, just that uneasy feeling that something was there. Just far enough to hide, just close enough to be watching. We went to sleep around 10 p.m., the kind of darkness where even the fire's glow didn't reach far. The sound of the creek helped me relax, but I woke up sometime past midnight. There was no noise, no wind, no movement, just the faint sound of dripping water, like rain on leaves, except the sky was clear. Then came another sound, a slow crunch of footsteps on the pine needles outside the tent. I froze. The steps were soft, but steady, slow enough to sound like someone trying not to be heard. I turned on my side, trying to breathe quietly. The steps moved closer, then stopped. For maybe a full minute, there was nothing, just silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. I wanted to wake Ben, but my arm felt stiff, heavy. Then I heard it again. Not footsteps, but the faint sound of fabric brushing against something, like someone dragging a jacket against a tree. I stayed awake for an hour, waiting, listening. Eventually, it went quiet again, and I must have drifted off because I woke up to daylight and the sound of the creek again. I stepped out of the tent. The first thing I noticed was the ground, footprints. Human ones. Not boots like ours, but lighter, maybe sneakers. They circled the tent once, stopped near where the truck was parked, and disappeared toward the woods. Ben hadn't noticed anything. He just shrugged and said maybe someone had been walking through, but the spot was too remote for that. We went about our day, fished, cooked, walked along the creek. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling didn't go away. Every time I looked at the tree line, I swore I saw movement. Not animals, not wind, something slower, more deliberate. By late afternoon, I told Ben we should pack up before dark, but he wanted to stay another night. I didn't argue. When the sun set, the woods felt heavier. I remember the smell, wet dirt and ash, mixed with something faintly metallic, like rust. I sat by the fire, trying not to stare into the dark. The light from the flames only reached so far, and beyond that, it was nothing but black. Around midnight again, I woke up. The fire was just embers. It was colder than the night before. I sat up and felt something strange. That crawling feeling at the back of your neck when you know you're not alone. Then, from outside, there was a sharp sound. Not a branch, not an animal. A metallic clink. I looked toward the truck. The sound came again. I unzipped the tent slowly, trying not to make noise. The air outside was freezing. I could see the truck just barely in the dim moonlight. Then I saw a figure near it. Someone standing by the passenger side, crouched low, doing something near the door. I couldn't see the face, just a dark jacket, hood up, head turned slightly toward the woods. My first thought was to yell, but instinct told me to stay quiet. I backed into the tent, grabbed my flashlight, and shook Ben awake. I pointed toward the truck. When he looked, the figure was gone. We stepped out together, and I could see fresh footprints again, leading away from the truck into the trees. The passenger door handle was smeared with dirt. We stayed up until sunrise, sitting by the fire with the hatchet nearby, not saying a word. When daylight came, we packed everything fast. But before leaving, I checked the ground again. The footprints didn't go far. They led to a patch of trees, then stopped near a large fallen log. Behind it, half buried under leaves, was a small torn backpack. Inside were old food wrappers, a rusted flashlight, and a knife. The blade was stained dark, like it hadn't been used in a while. I didn't touch anything else. We got in the truck and drove out of there, bouncing over the dirt road until the forest finally thinned out. The whole drive back felt like we were being watched, even though there was no one behind us. When we reached town, we stopped at a gas station to clean up and grab food. I checked the truck again, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. Deep scratches along the back bumper, like someone had dragged metal across it. It wasn't from rocks. It looked deliberate. I didn't tell Ben. I didn't tell anyone for a while. But a week later, when I couldn't stop thinking about it, I called the local sheriff's office in Missoula. The deputy who answered said Miller Creek had been closed off in the late 90s after a man had gone missing near there. They said hikers still reported seeing signs of camps, torn tents, leftover supplies, but no one ever stayed long. He didn't sound surprised when I told him what we saw. I still think about that night sometimes. Not because of what we saw, but because of what we didn't. Whoever that was, they weren't lost. They weren't hiking. They knew exactly where we were, and they came right up to our tent without making a sound. That's what stays with me, how quiet they were, how close. Now, whenever I camp, I never stay more than one night in the same place. I park the truck facing the road. I keep the hatchet by my side and the keys in my pocket. And every time I wake up in the dark, I listen. Because once you've heard footsteps circling your tent, slow, careful human footsteps, you don't forget that sound. You learn it, you wait for it, and you hope to never hear it again. It was late October 2014 when I decided to camp alone for a weekend in northern Arizona. I had been driving across the state for a photography project, and after a long week of work, I just wanted to disconnect for a few days. I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a quiet spot away from highways and towns. I stopped in a small gas station outside Winslow, bought some jerky, water, and firewood, and asked the cashier if there were any places nearby where people camped. She pointed toward a dirt road that led deep into the Coconino National Forest. I drove there without thinking twice. By the time I found a flat spot to set up my tent, the sun was already low. The place was beautiful but had an odd quietness to it. No sounds of cars, no distant hum of people, just wind brushing through dry grass and pines. I parked my truck beside a cluster of trees, unpacked my gear, and started building a fire. The air smelled like dirt and pine sap. The temperature dropped fast once the sun dipped below the horizon. When the fire finally started crackling, I sat beside it and ate from a can of beans, watching the flames twist. The forest was still, too still. Even in silence, you expect to hear something. An owl, a cricket, the rustle of some animal. But there was nothing. It was like the forest was holding its breath. I tried to shake the feeling off, blaming it on being alone. I camped solo before, but something about this area felt heavier, like the air itself was thicker. When I walked to the edge of the woods with my flashlight, I could see faint animal tracks in the dirt. Deer, maybe, but a few of them were strange. The prints were almost human, but not quite. The toes were longer, thinner, like they had stretched unnaturally far. I stared at them for a while before convincing myself they were distorted animal tracks. Around midnight, I crawled into my sleeping bag. The fire had burned down to a soft orange glow, and the cold crept in fast. I zipped up my tent and lay listening. The forest was still silent, but after a few minutes, I thought I heard something faint, like footsteps moving through the dirt outside, slow and spaced out. Not the quick pattern of a deer or raccoon, but steady, heavy steps. I held my breath, waiting. Then the sound stopped. I didn't move. My heart was thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe an elk, but I'd never heard one walk like that before. After about 10 minutes, nothing else happened, so I eventually forced myself to close my eyes. When I woke up, it was early morning. The air was freezing, my tent covered in a thin layer of frost. I stepped outside to stretch and saw more prints near the campsite. They weren't from me. I could see my own boot marks, and these were different. Barefoot, almost human, but too large and oddly shaped. They circled the tent once, then trailed off into the woods. I packed up most of my stuff that morning, ready to leave, but part of me wanted to explore a little before I drove out. The forest was open in some parts, with tall, pale trees and a soft bed of brown needles. I walked maybe half a mile north and found what looked like a dried-out creek. The ground there was cracked and pale gray, littered with bones. Animal bones, small ones mostly, but there were a few that were bigger. I didn't want to guess what they were. That uneasy feeling came back stronger. I turned around and started walking back toward camp. Halfway there, I smelled something awful, like rot and iron, something dead. The wind carried it from behind me, and I could feel the hair on my arms rise. I didn't look back, I just walked faster. When I reached camp, the smell was gone, but I noticed something else. My cooler had been dragged a few feet away from where I left it. I didn't even eat breakfast. I threw everything into the truck and left. The dirt road was long and bumpy, but I didn't care about the rough ride. I just wanted to get back to the main road. But before I reached it, I noticed something moving through the trees to my left, keeping pace with the truck. It was far enough that I couldn't make out details, just a shape. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe an elk, but it was running on two legs. I sped up and the shape disappeared. I drove straight back to Winslow and stayed in a cheap motel that night. I remember locking the door twice and keeping the bathroom light on. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks from being alone too long in the woods. The next day, though, I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. I looked up stories online about that area, and that's when I found the mentions of skinwalker sightings near the forest. People describing strange, human-like figures in the distance, hearing voices or footsteps outside tents, animals acting weird or disappearing. Most of the posts were old, but they were all from around the same region. I told myself not to believe any of it, but curiosity got the better of me. A week later, I drove back to the forest, this time in broad daylight and with a friend. I didn't tell him what had happened. I just said I wanted to photograph the area. When we reached the same campsite, everything looked normal, untouched. But a few feet from where I had pitched my tent, the dirt looked freshly disturbed. We found something buried shallowly there, just under the top layer of soil. My friend helped dig it out, and what we pulled up was a piece of fabric, like a ripped shirt sleeve stained and stiff with something dark, almost black. We didn't say anything. We dropped it back and covered it. We left within minutes. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. Every time I camp, I make sure I'm not too deep in the woods, not too far from a road or another person. I still remember that sound, the slow, heavy steps circling my tent, and the shape running beside my truck through the trees. I don't believe in monsters or folklore, but whatever I saw out there was real. Sometimes, when I think about those prints, the ones with the long, stretched toes, I realize something that I didn't notice before. The footprints around my tent weren't just circling once. There were two sets. One came from the woods toward my tent. The other went back. But the ones leading away weren't barefoot. They were boot prints, my size, and I still have those boots in my closet, crusted with dirt from that trip. When I look closely at the soles, I can see fine lines etched across them, thin, unnatural marks, like something had pressed long, narrow fingers into the rubber. That's when I stopped camping alone for good. It was late September 2019. I was 27, and I'd been planning a short camping trip for weeks. I lived in northern Idaho back then, not too far from the Canadian border. The forests there always felt older than the rest of the world. Huge pines, cold air that smelled like wet bark and soil, and miles of dirt roads that never seemed to end. I wanted a quiet weekend away from everything. No phone, no work, no people. Just me, the rain, and the woods. That Friday morning, the forecast said it would rain through the night, but I didn't care. I had a waterproof tent, good boots, and a truck that could handle the muddy roads. I packed enough food for 2 days, a heavy sleeping bag, a camp stove, and my old .22 rifle, mostly for coyotes or in case I ran into something that didn't want me there. I reached the spot I had marked on an old map, about 2 miles off a logging road near Priest Lake. It wasn't an official campground, just a clearing surrounded by tall trees, with an old fire ring made of stone someone had left behind years ago. The ground was soft from the rain earlier that week, but the sky looked clear when I got there. I parked the truck near the trees, unloaded my gear, and started setting up. By late afternoon, I had my tent up, a small fire going, and coffee heating on the stove. The forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting for something. The air was heavy and cool. The smell of pine needles mixed with smoke from the fire, and the wind made the branches creak high above me. I sat there for a while just listening. Around dusk, the rain started again. Light at first, tapping softly against the tent. I climbed inside, zipped up the flap, and lay on my sleeping bag. The rain picked up fast, turning into a steady downpour that drowned out every other sound. The water hissed against the fabric of the tent, and the wind pushed at the sides. It was cozy at first, the kind of sound that makes you sleepy. I read a few pages of a book with my flashlight, then turned it off and listened to the storm. Sometime during the night, I woke up. I didn't know what time it was, probably after midnight. The rain was still coming down hard, and the wind had grown stronger. The tent was shaking a little. I reached for my phone, but I turned it off earlier to save battery. I just lay there trying to go back to sleep. Then I heard something, faint but sharp enough to cut through the rain. A metallic sound like something hitting metal. It came from outside, near where I had parked the truck. I froze, listening. The rain softened for a second, and I heard it again. A light clink, then the sound of movement. Could have been anything, a branch falling, maybe a raccoon knocking something over. I told myself that and stayed still. But after a few seconds, I heard a new sound, slow footsteps in the mud. Heavy, too heavy for an animal that small. They stopped, then started again, closer this time. My heartbeat was so loud I could feel it in my ears. I didn't move. The footsteps circled the tent once, slow and careful, like whoever it was didn't want to be heard. I held my breath. The rain masked most of the sound, but every few seconds I could hear soft squelching in the wet ground and the faint rustle of fabric when something brushed against the side of the tent. I thought about unzipping the tent and shining my flashlight out, but something in me said not to. I reached for the rifle instead. My fingers were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I just held it tight and waited. After a few minutes, the sound stopped. No more footsteps, just the rain again. I waited longer, maybe 10, maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Finally, I let out a slow breath and tried to calm down. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe a deer or a bear curious about the smell. I stayed awake until I couldn't anymore. When I opened my eyes again, it was morning. The rain had stopped, and the forest was wrapped in mist. The light was gray and cold. Everything smelled like wet dirt and pine. I crawled out of the tent, stiff and sore from the night. The ground was soft and covered in puddles. My boots sank slightly as I walked toward the truck. When I saw it, I froze. The driver's side door was open. I knew for a fact I had locked it the night before. My stomach dropped. I walked closer, slowly scanning the ground. There were boot prints in the mud, clear ones, not mine. They led from the trees to the truck, around it, and then toward the tent. I followed them with my eyes and felt my throat tighten. The prints stopped about 2 feet from where I had been sleeping. Inside the truck, the glove box was open. My map was gone. A half-empty water bottle I'd left in the cup holder was missing too. The rest of the stuff, sleeping bag, tools, food, was untouched. Whoever had been there didn't want much. Maybe they just wanted to see who was camping. Maybe they wanted to scare me. I started packing immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I kept dropping things. Every sound in the woods, a snapping branch, a bird taking off, made my heart jump. I stuffed the tent into the back of the truck without folding it, tossed in everything else, and got behind the wheel. The tires spun for a second in the mud before catching. I drove down that dirt road faster than I should have, the truck bouncing over rocks and puddles. The forest looked different in daylight, less peaceful, more closed in. Every tree felt like it was hiding something. After a few miles, I reached the main road. I didn't stop until I was back in town. I parked outside a small diner, sat there for a long time, just staring out the windshield. The rain started again, softer now, tapping against the glass. I could still see the boot prints in my head, the way they circled my tent, the way they stopped right next to where my head had been. Later that day, when I got home, I double-checked my gear. Everything was there except the map and that water bottle. I told myself it was probably some drifter, maybe someone living rough in the woods who just happened to find me there. Maybe they didn't mean any harm. But the thing that stuck with me, and still does, was the way they moved. Slow, careful, like they were trying not to wake me. I didn't go camping again for almost 2 years after that. And even now, when it rains at night, that sound, the soft tapping, the steady rhythm, always takes me back to that night in the woods, lying there in the dark, listening to footsteps outside my tent and knowing someone was standing there in the rain, watching.